Hi, I'm Lori Conlin. I work at the National Institutes of Health as part of the Office of Intramural Training and Education. I run both the postdoc office and the Career Services Center here at the NIH, and I'm thrilled that you could join us today. This video is going to talk about jobs with the U.S. federal government for biomedical scientists, mostly for PhDs, but also for MDs and DDS, but definitely for scientists with higher degrees. First, we need to talk about the different agencies that need scientists. Throughout the federal government, biomedical scientists participate in a variety of ways, both at and away from the bench. So let's talk about some of the agencies that actually do need scientists. I think the first that I need to talk about is the one where I'm at, which is the National Institutes of Health. You'll notice on this list that everything is actually in acronyms. That's one thing about the federal government, we like to shorten everything up. So the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, is made up of 27 different institutes that do biomedical scientists for either diseases or organ systems. We have two different types of scientists that participate in the work here at the NIH. The first is through the Intramural Research Program. The Intramural Research Program looks a lot like a traditional academic science environment. We have different types of principal investigators, graduate students, postdocs, other types of students, who all do either basic or translational research in order to move the science of human health forward. The other part of our budget, or 85 to 90% of our budget, is actually part of the Extramural Research Program. The Extramural Research Program funds grants that are written by investigators at either universities or institutions, mostly here in the United States, but also around the world. So there's all kinds of scientists who have to evaluate those grants in order to understand how we're going to fund them, what strategic decisions we need to make about funding, and how we want to think about moving science forward going in the future. Another agency, one of our sister agencies, is the Center for Disease Control, or the CDC. Located mostly in Atlanta, Georgia, they deal with infectious agents and also understanding how to promote human health both here in the United States and around the world. The Center for Disease Control has a lot of lab-based research that happens around infectious disease agents, as well as different policy, epidemiology, and other types of jobs that are non-bench positions to make sure that the public knows information about diseases, infectious agents, and other types of items that will influence their health. Both the NIH and the CDC belong to our parent agency, which is Health and Human Services, or HHS. HHS is mostly known for things such as Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act. There's also a lot of biomedical scientists that participate at the HHS, both in perhaps looking at the finances behind science, are we spending the money appropriately, as well as perhaps there's a new initiative in biomedical research, and how are we going to make sure that that information is put out. The Food and Drug Administration also has a lot of jobs. This is the regulatory agency that deals with all food and drugs that go into the marketplace. There's different types of science that belongs here. The first non-bench jobs is what they're most known for, which is if a pharmaceutical company has a new drug that they would like to put on the market, the FDA needs to approve that drug before it can be sold. The second part, though, is they have a lot of bench-based science to do toxicology reports or other types of science to make sure that the information that we're getting from the companies that would like to market drugs or food in the United States match the data that they're giving us. The USDA actually has biomedical science as well. I think this is one that most people don't think about when they think about biomedical scientists. They think more about crops and they think about livestock, etc. But the Agricultural Research Service, or the ARS, actually does science that matches up very well with biomedical science. For example, how do prion diseases in our livestock or our wildlife, what are the basic science behind that? How does protein folding work, etc. So the USDA also has different types of positions that are non-bench based that are more granting, very similar to things such as the NIH grants. The Environmental Protection Agency does a lot of regulation around environment and human health, and most of those non-bench based regulatory jobs are actually here in Washington, D.C. Their laboratories are actually around the nation, with their headquarters located mostly in North Carolina. But they do have labs throughout the country to do different types of water quality sampling and sampling of environmental toxins, etc. The Department of Energy typically focuses more on energy-based research or physical science-based research, but there is some biomedical science that happens at the DOE at that intersection between biomedical science and physical science. The DOE labs are across the nation, and they're mostly well known for things such as Argonne National Lab, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, Pacific Northwest, and many more. In fact, many of you may know as a biomedical scientist, if you're a crystallographer, that the synchrotrons are typically located at some of the national labs. So there is biomedical scientists that work within this more physical science environment. As well as the DOE offers different types of granting mechanisms that biomedical scientists can participate in. NOAA, or Oceans and Atmosphere, is not one that has a lot of biomedical scientists, but I'm sure that there's a lot of different types of positions that, depending on your background, perhaps may fit your particular needs. NASA as well has two different divisions, both bench and non-bench jobs. There's a lot of bench jobs in NASA, which is the National Aeronautical and Space Administration, to deal with how do biological systems that go into space, how are they influenced by that trip? So they have two different, both they do their own research as well as give grants out to understand how biological systems are affected by space. The Department of Defense has a lot of science that happens for biomedical, both as core facility-based items as well as investigative research. For investigative research or basic-based research, you can think about the Army and U.S. AMRID. They're mostly located in Fort Detrick, here in Maryland, and they do a lot of anti-biological warfare-based research. The DoD, Department of Defense, has a lot of different types of positions for scientists, even if you want to become an officer. You can either be an officer of the military or a civilian. Both types of positions exist for scientists. As well as they do a lot of non-bench-based jobs in the Department of Defense as well. One division, for example, is the Cdmrp, or the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. This is a granting agency, along with DARPA, which is the next one on the list. These are both granting agencies that are housed within the Department of Defense that fund science throughout the country that deals with more military-based information. The FBI has science, both forensic-based science, thinking about perhaps DNA technology and DNA sequencing and things like that, as well as they hire scientists to be agents that work within the FBI. The FBI often hires PhD-based scientists because of the analytical way that we've been taught to think, and then the way we solve problems matches what the FBI needs. The National Science Foundation has jobs that are entirely non-bench based. The NSF is a granting agency that gives money out for mostly basic science. But they also do a lot of education initiatives, and so if you are a scientist who's interested in K-12 education and how are we funding that, the NSF often provides the money. For example, the Sesame Street is often funded by the National Science Foundation. The Smithsonian has a lot of science-based jobs that are typically developed in outreach or in education. So if that's something that you thought would be very interesting, is how do we tell the public about science, the Smithsonian may be a good place to think about positions. The Public Health Service is a 5th Commissioned Corps, similarly to the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Marines, and the Air Force. The Public Health Service deals entirely with science. So it's mostly doctors, veterinarians, dentists, but they also do have positions for PhD-based scientists that will help during national emergencies. So the congressional, the legislative, and the executive branches all also have biomedical scientists, but typically in policy-based jobs. The congressional you'll be a staffer perhaps in a congressman or congresswoman's office or sitting on a standing committee as a staffer. The executive branch has biomedical scientists mostly in the State Department or PCAST or US AMRID that are thinking about both national and international ways that we are talking about and dealing with scientific issues. Now these are all things that we've talked about, different agencies that need jobs, but what are the jobs actually called, both bench and non-bench jobs? Let's first take apart the types of jobs that exist that are non-bench. There's typically about 5 different types of jobs that actually happen: administrative and program, policy, education, regulatory, and even tech transfer that happen in all these different agencies within the federal government. So even though I may have talked about different types of positions in the earlier slide, All of the different agencies have all of these different components for non-bench-based jobs. The first is administrative and program. This is thinking perhaps how we're spending our scientific dollars, and so how are we making sure that the grants are being funded and that the grants that are coming in get processed and things like that. These are often called health science administrators, which is a catch-all term for most things that are grants officers or program officers that exist perhaps here at the NIH or the USDA or other types of agencies that do a lot of administrative of federal dollars. There's also grant management specialist, which is usually a position that is more lower level, and most PhDs will not go into a grants management specialist type position, but they are dealing with the moving of money through the granting agencies. A couple of other terms we often use are program analyst and interdisciplinary scientists. Again, these are more catch-all terms that you'll find in different types of agencies. The FDA, for example, for most of their regulatory affairs type jobs, are often using the words interdisciplinary scientists. For some agencies, such as here at the NIH, the program side of the house and the grant review side of the house are separate. So there are different people at the NIH who deal with program, which is how are we funding different types of items, as well as then there's another group of people who deal with review. So how are we setting up peer review panels, making sure the appropriate people are in the panels, making sure that what they say in the room gets recorded and then sent back to the program staff. Both sides, the program and the review side, both of them have PhDs because you have to understand the science in order to make sure that the right people are in the room. And other agencies such as the NSF or Cdmrp or perhaps even the USDA, that job, the peer review process and the program side of the house are combined into one job. So you just need to do perhaps a little bit of informational interviewing for the agency that you're most interested in to understand how the grant process actually works. The next set of jobs are actually based on policy, and policy has two different ways that we think about it: science for policy and policy for science. And so this is really how does science influence the policy that's out there, or how does policy influence the science that we do? So the different types of policy analysts could be the legislative analysts. So these are people who perhaps even work here at the NIH or the NSF or the CDC that liaise with folks who are in the legislative branch to make sure that our Congress understands the science behind the laws that they're passing. Or on the other side, which is someone who's in the legislative branch going back towards the different agencies that do science to make sure that they're getting the information they need to make informed decisions. There's also some policy-based items that are strategic thinking. So how are we going to fund things? What are we going to fund in the future? What is biomedical science for the next 10 years going to look like? And what are we going to do in order to make policy that we can get there? These jobs are typically called policy analysts in every single agency. So if you're looking at usajobs.gov, you'll look for jobs that are called policy analyst. A lot of the different agencies actually do some education, although education has recently been refocused into making sure that this is at the NSF, NASA, and the Smithsonian. So a lot of the education, especially in the K through 12 range, is now located at those particular agencies within the US government. But there's also different types of training programs. So anyone who has science on their campuses often has postdocs, graduate students, fellowships, etc. So there's different types of training programs, such as my job, that exist throughout the federal agencies. The regulatory units, things such as EPA and the FDA, have review officers that review the documents that come in. They have inspectors that go out and inspect plants or inspect fields or do a lot of field-based inspections. And a lot of times they call these guys interdisciplinary scientists. It's a catch-all term for PhD level scientists within the regulatory agencies. Then any of the agencies that actually do basic science that want to think about how do we move this basic science into the marketplace also have information about technology transfer. So there's jobs in tech transfer in the NIH, the CDC, the EPA, the DoD. So if tech transfer sounds interesting, there's a lot of different opportunities there as well. Now, if we're thinking about the different types of jobs that are available in the federal government that are bench-based or research-focused, there's three different types of areas that we typically think of. The first is discovery-based research. These are things that, such as a principal investigator, a staff scientist, a postdoc, a biologist, etc., would be part of. Most of the agencies that hire discovery-based research are the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the USDA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, Center for Disease Control, the EPA, and NASA. All of these have discovery-based researchers that are typically called biologist, chemist, physicist, etc. The regulatory-based agencies as well have testing facilities, toxicology facilities, quality assurance and quality control facilities. This is things such as the FDA, the USDA, the CDC, and the EPA. For example, say there's a new salmonella outbreak in lettuce. The USDA will go off and do a lot of testing, microbiology analysis to understand how that actually is moving through the food supply. The FDA will go and monitor different pharmaceutical companies to make sure that they're living up to FDA standards and that the data that the FDA is getting is matching what's actually happening within the facilities. And then almost all the different agencies that have science also have service science. Think of a core facility such as perhaps a DNA sequencing lab. All the agencies above have some of these core facilities, including things such as the FBI or the Veterans Administration, which has a lot of labs that are focused around hospital-based laboratories. So there's all kinds of different jobs that happen for biomedical scientists and in the federal government, both bench and non-bench. And I hope that you really learned about the types of jobs that are out there and now can explore what best fits your needs. Please join us at www.training.nih.gov for more career-related resources for your career searches. You can watch our other video on how to find and apply to U.S. government jobs that can also be found on our website, www.training.nih.gov.